So did you hear what local celebrity Steve Maviglio did recently? He is now nationally renowned, the Democratic talker from here in Sacramento.
He's got the coveted like king shithead of Twitter award.
Yeah. It's about that rule, right? Where every day there's one celebrity on Twitter and
you don't want it to be you.
Not to be them. Yeah.
No.
It was Steve the other day. So there was a protest, of course, in DC, and the cops were attacking and trying to round up all of these Black Lives Matter protesters. And this very nice man opened his door and like took in like 70 of them as cops were trying to like beat them and like arrest them. And like apparently they were shooting pepper spray through the window. And you know, it was a good story of this, like, oh, this guy helped these people who were in need, who he didn't know. And Steve fucking Maviglio comments on some tweet for the story. And
well, he's
like,
being heralded. This guy is being heralded as a hero by Twitter, right?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Right. That's the language they're using to refer to him. Yeah.
Well, Steve tweeted under the article tweet, a real hero would pay his rent on time.
Okay, so
as it turns out, Steve owns this home out in DC.
Wow.
It was like a real hero would pay their rent on time so that the property owner could pay their taxes or something.
Yeah. For the services that the community gets.
Right.
Steve, just such a piece of shit.
A real hero would pay my mortgage for me.
Right.
A real hero would help me make profit off of your general living expenses.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, in the middle of a pandemic and just a national fight for anti-racism, what a real hero is. And it's a person that pays their rent.
Dude, how relieved.
He's a union buster. He worked with like Verizon during the California Democratic convention when Verizon was demonstrating outside the convention. During that convention, there was this really close race for chair of the state party, and Eric Bauman very closely, in kind of a weird, shady race, won and immediately hired Steve to to run his comms. And my other favorite thing about Steve, because this shows how just bottom of the barrel he is. He worked for Kevin Johnson.
Wow.
And he went, when Mandy Koba came out and finally, 20 years later, talked about her story and what she said happened between her and Kevin Johnson, Steve went on TV and implied that Deadspin paid her to come out. Like, just the worst man in the world.
Dude, how happy do you think that landlords are that everybody is so mad at the cops right now? Because I feel like the fucking eye of Sauron just kind of like shifted over to the right. And you got to imagine if you're a landlord, you're like, oh, thank Christ. Oh, thank Christ. Thank you so much.
For now.
Yeah, we'll get back to you.
We're coming back to them.
That's the thing. Social media doesn't forget.
No.
Not at all.
Well,
does not forgive.
And we get more like what's mainstream in general gets better over time, right? So that particular tweet is going to age particularly badly, right? Like it's not like it's going to get better over time. It's like it's going to seem more and more egregious the farther we are from it. So
follow him forever.
I can't wait. There's a big movement to get him kicked off the Sacramento Co-op right now.
Please.
I think they voted him off, didn't they?
I
thought I read that went through. I could be wrong.
No.
I could be wrong.
Yeah, I have not seen that. He's also on the board of the SAC Press Club, which I do not partake in because it's basically run by people like Steve. So I have my own secret journalist meetup. And he's on the board of CADA, which is a nonprofit housing. He represents CADA. He's on their board.
CADA?
everything.
I mean, do you know what?
Like, somebody with those beliefs just should have nothing to do with it. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
So anyway,
piece of shit.
There's a lot of politics happening in Sacramento right now, and Kata is going to be hearing from people very soon. And
Please.
So we'll have more on that in a future episode, I'm sure.
It's like I want to vomit now.
I just so I'm 100% crystal clear, our opinion of Steve Maviglio
is great. We want to give him the Voices Hero Award because he's just doing such great work that aligns with our values.
I think based on this tweet, we can start talking about him or introing him as a friend of the show.
A definite friend of the show. And we should probably pin that tweet
comrade.
Somewhere. Just put a pin in it just so we can keep that tweet handy because
totally.
It really, I mean, if somebody wants to know like what is Voices River City, what is your take on things, we should be like, take a look at this tweet and then you'll see where we are.
Good idea. We should, you know what we should do is take all the tweets that are like the wackest tweets we can find and just tattoo them on all over your body so that when you run into these people, you can be like, oh, hang on.
This was you.
That's you right there. Right?
Love it. Love it.
Love to think about it.
All right, I'm going to get Steve's smarmy ass face right on my ribcage.
God.
Yeah.
Sexy, yo. Sexy.
Yep. All right, you guys want to do the show?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Can't wait.
Why not?
All right, let's ride.
Voices, the things they said. Voices, some from those dead. All the voices heard. Voices, things we say. Voices, they're in your head. All the voices heard.
Hello, everyone. You have Kempa.
And Skylar.
And Shannon.
And Flo.
Full house. Well, yes. I was just going to welcome you. Yeah. Sorry, Jane. So, yeah, I guess the secret's out, everyone. We have a very special guest today in Dr. Jane Mantey. How are you?
I'm living. Praise.
Yeah. Well, so we need to let everybody know, full disclosure, Jane currently lives in Texas.
Whoa! Fred on me.
Flo's pumped about this, you can tell.
Yeah, Flo has a team out trying to kidnap her and her wife to bring them back.
Correct.
So.
Fake news. It's fake news. Jane lives here. She always lives here.
Well, I think Jane brought up a good deal that if you actually run for office, then maybe she'll come back.
Yes.
Oh, Jane.
Look.
Yeah.
Look.
Yeah.
How do I turn this? How do I turn my camera off and just slink away?
I will do Flow 2022, Flow 2024. Let me know.
I love it.
Yeah. Give me a heads up.
Sheriff Flo.
I'll take it.
OMG.
Although that would be I don't think we've never said it before, but that would violate our having cops on the show.
Give me the show.
So if you become a cop, you will not.
You got 2 years.
Right.
You got 2 years.
But anyway, so Jane is just a wildly impressive person. I think I met you when you were in the Capital Fellows program like 5-6 years ago.
Science Fellows, yeah. Yes.
And your background is in, what was that, in biomedical sciences, something like that?
Biomedical sciences with a concentration in pharmacology and toxicology.
Okay. And you are currently back at academia, and yet you are just running the show in a different space as the Associate Director of Comparative Race and Ethnic Studies at Texas Christian University, correct?
Yep. No idea how I got here.
Jane is also a journalist and also just one of the best community activists I've ever met. The list could go on and on. So we're super excited to have you on today.
Oh, yes.
And
reactions.
I know.
and so today, Shannon came up with an amazing idea. effectively, we've all been living within the context of George Floyd's America, right? And these big discourses on what we should do with these murderous, violent cops throughout the country. And one big question people are having, especially a lot of liberals, is, all of you people, all of you activists, you keep saying, abolish the police, defund the police. What do those mean? That sounds way too radical and out in left field to me.
Yep.
And so today we wanted to take a minute to really lay out for folks what that meant. Shannon's awesome idea was for us all to read The End of Policing. It's a book by Alex Vitale, and it's under Verso Books. And if anybody wants to follow along with us, we're reading a couple chapters an episode. It is a free ebook now. They just made it free in the ebook form for this cultural context. So that's really exciting. So we all have read chapters 1 and 2. I'm about 3 pages behind on my homework, but I think that'll be okay. And so why don't I just open the floor, and like Flo and Jane, you both have talked about this stuff at length. And I think I've historically built my worldview on things like this, off of talking with you two and reading you two. What does a world without police mean? And Flo, I know that you have been sort of parsing apart two terms, right? Which is defunding and, abolition of police. And so if you want to break down those two.
Absolutely. We'll start with Jane.
Yeah,
she's our guest.
You put me out there. Okay, well, number one, thanks for having me on the air. Even though we're here in Texas and it's dark out here, it's not sunlight like y'all.
I know. I'm so sorry it's so late over there.
It's okay. It's okay. I'm glad to be here. I think just to your question about, a world without police, I think for me, the one thing, it's actually really weird to say this, but I think it's a world in which, we can breathe, in all the ways that means. For example, I'll be real brief with this example here. Walking the dogs just the other day, yesterday, and saw a house being built, very nice house. We live near a nice neighborhood where I'm at right now in Texas. And we wanted to see, does the backyard, does it slope down, and how did they engineer that, right? And I wanted to walk with my dog and go look. And my wife was like, come back this way, because you just don't know, right? What could happen? Who could be called to get you? Right. You just don't know what will happen walking down the street. You just don't know.
That's a very similar situation to what happened with Ahmaud Arbery, correct?
Yep. Yeah. Exactly what happened to him. You just don't know. And I think having this militarized force that's always looming, that can always take you, knowing that they're gone, that there isn't some looming force that can just take you or take people who you love, would be a big, just sigh of relief, at least for myself as a Black woman. I think to not know that they are there to take people who I care about or take me.
Jane, I think you bring up, when you envision the future, you bring up something that's really important, which is this idea of the police as actors of violence. And I think that that's something that a lot of people don't always bring up. Can you maybe say a little bit more about sort of what the difference is between emergency response and public safety, and how we maybe need to define those?
I feel like I want to, so I was reading maybe the other day, it was Patrice Cullors, and she was saying, and to be succinct, that, we need to move from a system of violence, punitive violence, right, to a system of care, right? Oftentimes people who are in distress, right? Whether that be they're going through a mental health crisis, whether it be that they're homeless, whether it be that they're just poor, and maybe they're borrowing some internet, Maybe they're, borrowing some water from somebody's house, some power from somebody's house, right? And they're doing all these things because they're in distress. And we know and we see that they're in distress, but we don't want to see it. We don't want to look at it. We don't want to see people who are in these positions. It's unsettling, it's uncomfortable. And then we have to ultimately do something about it. And so rather than, deploy people who actually would care about folks who are in distress, we deploy people who we train to be violent, to respond with oftentimes like really excessive and like lethal force. And so, going back to your question, Dave, when I think about like a world without police, it's a world in which we actually care about what's happening to people, right? We don't want to just, hide them under the rug or 6 feet underground, right? We want to actually care about them, make sure they're okay, make sure they have somewhere to live, somewhere they can eat, that they can actually like wash their clothes and like wash themselves and just or live normal lives, right? And right now we use police who are like really a paramilitary force, if we're honest, to deal all the things that we don't want to see or deal with anymore.
Yeah, that's really well put. This idea that we treat poverty and inequality punitively, as opposed to caring for these community members that obviously need us. Flo, as a epidemiologist, as a public health professional, I think you talk a lot about that problem, how, there are preventative measures we can take to improve their lives so they don't end up, any small little thing, let's say selling Lucy's, on the street corner, right?
Garner.
Yeah. So Flo, can you speak to that a bit?
Absolutely. The real challenge in our community is that we invest so much in what we've been describing as sort of emergency response, right? After the fact, we come along and we criminalize things. And all we really have at that point is either the ability to incarcerate you or the ability to, maybe restrain or detain you. But it's all violence, right? We don't come along with preventive solutions. So we don't invest in communities and say we're going to have affordable housing. We move you along when you don't have a place to live. We don't invest in education and making sure that there are adequate jobs and they pay a livable wage. We arrest you for, either being either committing low-level crimes that maybe are crimes of necessity, or we even, evict you from your home for being unable to pay it. We don't support you in terms of, being able to have access to adequate food. Like, we don't do all the things up front that create healthy and well-adjusted societies. And then we turn around and we blame the very people that we didn't support for what are the natural consequences of poverty. And I'm just going to take a quick moment to stand on this soapbox of why it is incredibly racist and inappropriate to use the term black on black crime, because most crime, it happens within proximity of people and people who live in proximity with one another are often of the same racial and ethnic background. There's a saying that 11 o'clock on Sunday morning is the most segregated hour of the week. And it's often when people are at church, right? And that's because we often live and worship and spend time in communities of other people who look like us. And that is true for white people. That is true for people of all races and ethnicities, and obviously is also true for Black people. And so to make it seem as if it's somehow different that crime happens in people who have historical and ongoing subjugation and live in poverty and are traumatized makes it seem as if it's related to their race and not related to the ways in which we have systematically disenfranchised and caused people to be in poverty. So I bristle every time someone uses that term because it allows us to move away from the root causes of things and constantly come back to blaming the people who are under the system. And the same thing is true for defining policing as public safety. It takes the onus away from us to actually invest in public safety and makes it seem as if investing in emergency response, often violent emergency response, is the only way to go.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
All that.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like kind of to what you were saying earlier, like an ounce of prevention, can like get out in front of a lot of these problems before they even would even happen, you know? Like, I don't know. And to kind of what you were saying about like the police get called for everything. I mean, they get called to domestic disputes. They get called to deal with unhoused folks. You know, they get called to deal with people who are having mental health crises. And they're not equipped to do, like, the cops are a hammer, right? But to somebody who only has a hammer, every problem looks like a fucking nail, right?
Yep.
I mean, and to kind of go a little further with that analogy, I think, like, if I'm building a house, right? Like, is it possible for me to like hammer screws into wood? Like, yes, technically that's possible. Is it technically possible for me to like break a plank in half by hitting it with a hammer? Yes, like I can do that. But if I, instead of doing that, use a screwdriver to put the screw in and fucking use a tape measure and a saw to cut my plank, then I'm building a house that I can actually live in that fucking functions properly because I have the correct tools to address the job that I'm doing. And it feels like, to me, one of the main tenets of this is that the cops do not have the tools. All they have are hammers, and they're just out fucking whacking everything with hammers, you know, as opposed to trying to actually improve the situation.
And they continue, like, so they've got the hammers. And the other thing is that, like, to bring this kind of back around to defunding the police, is that not only do they have the hammers, but they get a new hammer every time they hit the nail. Yep. So we just continue to pull resources out of communities that are experiencing, like, you know, extreme poverty in absolutely every way, from like poverty in the homes to poverty in the community resources. And it's because we've talked about this before. We continue to pull money away from like Measure U, for example. Flo, you posted today about Measure G. Was it?
Yes.
So maybe you can talk a little bit about that, and you know, we can get into this whole like why the argument of defunding, abolishing the police is so important for our communities.
Absolutely. You know, so one of the things that we've talked a lot about on the show is, you know, Measure U money, but the fix is sort of in on why the Measure U money was able to be spent in the way it was, and why why City Council in particular was so opposed to Measure G. And that really came down to the fact that they had already given away the money that could have been used for Measure G to the police. And so at this point, they didn't feel like they had the money. They were unwilling to invest it in children, but were perfectly happy to invest it in the police in ways that we don't even know how it was going to be spent. And so the difference in the allocations would have been $2 million. So $10 million went to the police with no questions asked, but $12 million was going to be set aside for children in the city. And what's really interesting about that is even who voted for it. And if you look precinct by precinct, you'll see that the precincts that are in lower income communities and communities of color, almost 2-to-1 voted in favor of Measure G, which would have allowed that money to be protected from City Council to be able to spend on other things and only spend on kids. But in our affluent communities, it was almost the reverse. It was almost 2-to-1 that they voted against it. And that speaks a lot to sort of, you know, who benefits from, you know, who feels they benefit most from our programs. And many times in affluent communities, they feel like they benefit from the protection that the police offers, because that protection is often offered towards their property and their personhood. And if you're in lower income communities, you're hoping that money is spent anywhere else except for on the police, because they often are a source of terror and a source of violence in your community.
They're an occupying force in your community.
Yes, they are.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So
and having them around means more people go to prison. It means more people are criminalized in this way. It means more fees are levied. And it means more violence is happening in your community, period, without really a reprieve from that. So it's important that we link these issues, because we have one finite pot of money. So when we spend it in certain ways, it means there's less money available for other things.
Right. Mm-hmm. Do you know off the top of your head what percentage of the budget goes to the police and SAC? Or like law enforcement in general?
in Sacramento, I know it's almost 2/3 goes to police and fire.
Okay.
I believe they get the plurality of the entire budget. I think it's somewhere around 40 to 45% of the funds in the city go to the police department.
Yeah, that's fucking outrageous.
I think it is important to, Flo, what you just did is let people know that defunding police / abolishing the police, which again, I guess we'll get to, those two terms.
The difference, yes.
Those are always directly tied to decarceration.
Correct.
Yes.
They always should come hand in hand.
They're never separate. You can't do one without the other. You just can't.
Right.
And I think Flo was getting to that point. And we have to sort of ask ourselves this question, as Flo articulated, between the breakdown for Measure G, votes, as to why is it that affluent folks, right, in particular, who tend to be white, right, really want the police to exist? Why do we want, as a society, for police to exist? And Flo mentioned, the fees, the fines, right, up to a few years ago, asset forfeitures, and then get into decarceration. How much California and many other states depend on prison and jail labor, right, to supplement so many costs. And I think that's what people, when they hear phrases like defund the police, abolish the police, they don't always make those economic links, right? That a part of this here is, of course, yes, we want to free money from police budgets to give back to the community, to give us actual social services that will help us to thrive. But also we know that very much so the carceral state, the police state, is linked to capitalism, right? And that without having this underlayer, this shadow economy of prison labor, of jail labor, of extracting dollars from Black and brown communities, right, through police, many of our cities' budgets, many of our state budgets, many of our even private companies, what they do could not be as affordable or as plentiful without having these shadow funds that come back to the state, that come back to companies via prisons and police.
Yeah, right? I think that's a really good point. And we'll get to that when we talk a little bit about the history of policing. I think our last two guests have been really good at covering this deeply racist history in policing, but it's also very xenophobic. And it's also very classist. It's representing the interests of capital so that lower classes can't rise up. And these are all very intertwined. So I think that's a great point.
We had Tiffany on last time, and Tiffany is part of Decarcerate Sacramento, and one of the things that they had been really instrumental in leading the charge on is emptying out the jails during COVID-19. And one of the things I want to lift up is that it's been a really quiet process. It's not gotten front page news that we let almost a third of the people who were in our jails out, but it also hasn't been the absolute mayhem that everybody anticipated that was going to be. And so I think that's also important, that a lot of people, their first question when we start talking about defunding the police, and if we were to get to a place of abolition, defunding, I remind people, is not as radical as it sounds. And there's actually a really great quote from a tweet earlier this week that was people think defunding the police sounds radical until you realize we've been defunding education for years, right? And I think that I think it's really clear that we talk about what that means. Of course, in public health, we've been defunding all the things that actually do public safety. And I'm trying to figure out a way to a pithy way to be able to capture you want police, but you don't fund public safety. Nope. It's a really strange thing, but it is important to raise up that we were able to release a third of our jail population, and we have not seen any, societal consequences to that.
Yeah, but let's also not forget that if people want police and public safety, and there's a failure to recognize that public safety naturally happens when police are not involved in communities, right? When police come into a situation, we have been shown time and time again, and forget anything before a week and a half ago. Let's just talk about the last, like when the protests started in Sacramento specifically. Any time the police showed up, there were violence escalated because
they
the police
they
were
escalate.
there. They only escalate, and cops come into situations, and this is stated in the book, that when police come into every situation imagining that it's their last situation, and they have a fucking gun on their hip and one on their ankle, and they've got pepper spray and, you know, an assault rifle in their car, they come in all hella hypervigilant for people. For what? Like a bunch of people shouting George Floyd's name? Are you fucking kidding me?
Yep.
And they've been trained to view us as enemy combatants, not as like citizens that they're supposed to be serving and protecting. We are their enemy, you know, and that is the fucking training that they get, you know.
And there's centuries now of history of police being like, they were obviously in existence to quash social uprisings, the civil rights movement, to quash labor uprising, to basically, when lower classes get fed up, to come in for the interests of capital and to crack some heads, to basically cow people. Can we start a little bit with the beginning of the book right now? And, you know, they sort of start with the premise that I think I'm getting this from a lot of white male liberals, the sort of questions of like, well, we need police, right? What will we do for the crimes? And they bring up two things, I think, really well. Number one is that most crime, most of their punitive actions, 99.9%, are things that really we could just decriminalize.
Yes.
The
war on drugs
tomorrow.
Completely useless. It
serves shout out to The Wire for being what I would imagine to be the very first sort of show to talk about that.
Yes, honestly.
You know, in season 1, they were really honest about the fact that like part of the reason why, you know, selling drugs is so violent is because it's illegal and you're constantly fighting over territory. And, you know, there's this line between what's allowed and what's not. And we're seeing that same thing happen right now with marijuana, that now that it's, you know, now it's been decriminalized, the underground operators are now being targeted by, you know, by the major operators, and wanting to have more law enforcement to crack down on them because they want to protect their own capital, right? And they're either being used as a pawn between the legal and illegal industry, or they're used to be able to kind of stir up and make more money, you know, on the back end, for entirely underground economies.
So, you know, and so again, just to clarify this picture, you know, when people are like, well, you know, what about the cops? We need the cops. If you look at the war on drugs, decriminalize drugs, right? Fire the cops who are spending all their time doing that, and invest it in drug treatment programs. Invest it in community spaces,
safe
that
injection
allow you to deal with
and shit like
addiction.
that.
And that's already happening. I mean, and so a part of me, you know, really like gets internally, like, I guess, pissed, because it's not as if people don't know who are paying attention, right? We have been making those pivots mainly around like the opioid crisis, right? Where we are seeing actually the proliferation of like these problem-solving courts, these like drug courts, where you don't have to go to jail, you don't have to get locked up, just go see a judge who gives you a regimen and like, don't fuck it up. Right?
But when did those become popular, Jane?
White people.
White people.
So they became popular when meth became a public health problem. That was when people were like, maybe we shouldn't lock these people up. Maybe this is an addiction issue.
That's my cousin.
Before that,
lock them up.
it was lock them up and throw away the key, and it was all about criminalizing these crack babies, right? Like we did real damage to communities, and then when it hit white communities, suddenly it's a public health problem to the point that the CARES Act.
Now they got
CARES
fucking
Act money
Narcan
actually
up in
allows. Yeah. I mean, the CARES Act money for COVID-19 allows for money to be spent on on meth treatment. Like, it's written in now in a way that would have never happened when crack was all the rage.
I mean, this is something that I think is a really important part of the conversation around defunding and abolishing police, is just like this constant reminder that the white supremacy is baked in to why the police exist, additionally baked into why certain punitive measures exist, right? Like you talk about like these, like standing before a judge and getting like a regiment instead of doing jail time, right? So we have to talk, when we talk about like police and carcerality, like we have to immediately talk about white supremacy.
It cannot be removed. It is baked into the product. Yeah. And like, I mean, I think that also goes to speak, I think like another, like to me at least, it seems like another sort of big concept part of this is that our justice, the American justice system, not only is obviously has always been hugely white supremacist, but it's about revenge and punishment. And there's no, like, our justice system is not interested in rehabilitation. Our justice system is not interested in uplifting communities. Our justice system is interested in fucking your shit up for really any reason that it can do it, to put you in fucking prison so that you can fucking work for pennies on the dollar or whatever and make the dude who owns the prison a bunch of money. That, like, also, like, let's not fuck around with it. That's slavery. That's, I mean, like, they fucking shut the plantations down. Now we have private prisons. It's the exact same fucking thing. You know? And I think it is, and that is because on its face, we aren't interested in rehabbing anybody. We aren't interested in making the community better. We are interested in exploiting the lives and the bodies of people who don't matter to society in order to make a fucking buck. And I don't think that anything can fucking really get started on changing until like people understand that like that is what that's what the judges are in place to do. That's what fucking lawyers are in place to do. And that is 110% what the fucking cops are in place to do. You know?
And people know that. I think deep down inside they know that, right? Like the woman in Central Park, Amy Cooper.
Thank you.
Right. And you just saw her. She, like, people know. That's why they call the cop. And that's also why, in many ways, if we really cared about like public safety, we really cared about, community health, right? We would actually require people to deal with their mess, their conflict. You're not always going to like your neighbor. You're not always going to like that, they're playing loud music, or that they're walking their dog near you or whatever, right? But how are we actually encouraging people to talk through those conflicts?
Right.
Community-oriented
solutions, right?
Approaches to this,
Right.
But instead, if you know that you can dial a number, a very short number, right? And someone will come with a gun, a baton, whatever they bring, a rifle, right? And
who wants to use those things? Who is going to come in wanting to use those things?
We'll bust them, and we'll instinctively look to the person who is the darkest and be like, "What are you doing?" And we'll do that, right? People know that, even if they are a quote unquote good person, a liberal or whatever, they know this and they use it, right? And it's for that reason when I talk to people, particularly some of my friends, even some of my black friends who are maybe a little bit more middle class, who are a little bit more upper class, right? They know this, and they enjoy having that luxury service, which is profoundly fucked up, but they enjoy it.
Yeah.
Skylar, you said something really important that I think warrants a little more explanation. And you were talking about, how like they want to come and use these weapons. And you talked a little bit about their training. So, shout out to one of my colleagues, D'Angelo Mack, because when he was doing, violence prevention work, one of the things that he talked about was the training of police. And I'm hoping that some of this has changed a little bit since then, but their initial sort of orientation was like showing them videos of all of these people all these times that the police had been killed by somebody, you know, on the line of duty. And it's like this montage of just all of the things to really traumatize you and make you afraid for your life. And then you're handed a series of weapons, and you're basically like supposed to now put on your armor and go out and serve, right? And it's like, all you've done is scare me to death, and then giving me all these weapons that equip me to go out and to do, you know, to engage in warfare, right? And so when we're saying like they're interested in using them, it's like they are primed to see issues everywhere. And my best example of this, I know we're not going to go into like our police stories, but I was asked to do a ride along with the Sacramento Police Department last year, and I very reluctantly did. And during that ride along,
there was such a good chance that was just going to be a trap. You just get in the back of the car, and they're like,
right? So during this ride along, we go to a stop where a man who was experiencing addiction and likely maybe was unhoused had walked into a home that was unlocked. The family was in the backyard. It was summertime, you know, and the family's in the backyard. They could see through the window. They didn't own any weapons. The person had no shirt on, no shoes, and was making himself a sandwich. Okay, so this is a non-violent encounter. I arrive on the scene with the sergeant who I'm doing the ride along with, and there are 8 police officers there, and they have the K-9 unit, and they are preparing to send the K-9 unit in. And for those of you who are unaware, the K-9 unit goes in and bites you, right? Because they're not trained to de-escalate. They are trained to attack and neutralize the threat. And so they go in, they bite you. We pay $1 million in medical bills to clean you up and everything, and that's the end of it. And so my sergeant, who I was riding along with, said, well, did you try calling him out first? 8 police officers, and nobody had tried that. Of course. So he says to them in what felt to me like the most patronizing way, but he was dead serious. He was like, well, why don't we try calling him out first? They did. He walked out. End of story. $1 million saved. Like when I see that they're along,
I'm wondering if he would have even said it.
Maybe not.
Dude, he would have launched a fucking grenade into those people's house.
Well, I think what would have happened is we wouldn't have stopped at that call, because we only stopped because it was a Sunday afternoon. There wasn't a whole lot going on. So we stopped at this call. We wouldn't have, and the K-9 unit would have been sent in on this person, and it would have cost us, like I said, at least $100,000 or more, totally, depending on how much damage they did, right? And so I'm just like, seriously? Like 8 adults who are supposed to have 60 credits of college and are supposed to be like our best and brightest and our leaders and protectors. 8 people couldn't think to try, hey, dude, can you come outside first?
Yeah. When you say cost us too, like that's important because we pay for that shit. The taxpayers pay for that shit. That doesn't come out of that like exorbitant amount of the budget that we give to the cops. They keep all of that. We pay on top of all the shit that we pay the cops. We pay to fucking settle on all these cases where they completely just like destroy the fucking situation that they're in there to try and control. That comes out of taxpayers' pockets.
We issue bonds because we can't afford to pay for it. Like, hey, we have so much, police violence, debt build up here. We issue a bond. Someone can pay this for us. We'll pay you back sometime. So it's hella trifling.
Yeah. And, there's no political will among our mayor and city council members to push back on this concept. They're like, we need law enforcement. We need them to protect us. Can I keep moving this forward? Okay, so
absolutely.
About the war on drugs.
Go for it.
Flo, you brought up something which is, it's another thing that our cops in particular in Sacramento deal with. It's the homelessness crisis and hunger crisis, right? Perhaps mental health crisis is rolled into that story too.
Yes.
And again, fire these cops, invest in these services, and this guy doesn't end up in a stranger's kitchen making a fucking sandwich.
Right.
Correct.
Another one that the vast majority of cops partake in, it's enforcement of quality of life offenses. Basically, it's broken windows theory policing. This was sort of made popular about 30, 40 years ago. The idea being that, well, if you don't allow if you sort of try and keep a neighborhood like beautified, right? You don't allow kids to do graffiti. If a window gets broken, you fix it immediately. And if all of these things happen, if there's some order to your community, then people will be less likely to commit crime in your community. This has long since been debunked. But also, you know, this is a type of policing. I lived in New York from 2009 to 2012, and this was during the worst of Mayor Bloomberg just terrorizing Black neighborhoods with broken windows policing. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of kids getting stopped and frisked for standing outside their home because they were accused of loitering, you know, or of whatever, right? You know, something like public urination could really get you in a lot of trouble. These enforcements of these things just have a terribly detrimental effect, not just on those community members, but also on the community's relationship with the police force. Can anyone speak to that a little bit?
So something that I'm interested in. I mean, I'm interested in talking about it as we're discussing this is community policing, and like it's how we like debunk that community policing is actually a thing that we should be advocating for.
Because I remember during that time, I remember thinking that must be the answer, and I've long been disabused of that.
And that's, I mean, like you said.
So what is community policing?
I mean, well, it's this idea that if you get more brown people to come in and be the enforcers, and if you get people who kind of know the neighborhood and get to know people, that somehow or another they become, you know, partners on the basketball court and a friend, like they're friends of the show, right? They become friends of the community, and it's better, and they don't take nearly as aggressive a stance at all of that. And there's just evidence that that's true. There's absolutely no evidence that it works.
It's also asking us to forget the role that police play in our society. Right. As people who just like continue to perpetuate racist ideology and violence against Black and brown people. Like, so it's asking us, it's like denying the truth that police terrorize poor Black and brown communities, kill Black men, I can say kill, right? Yeah, I can say kill. Yeah. Black men.
She's trying not to get us sued.
Yeah. Disproportionately, their focus is just keeping white people comfortable, and it's but yet like they can be the Mr. Rogers of the neighborhood too.
Right. Let's be so clear about how much we have accepted police violence. Let's go back to the Amy Cooper story, because I think the takeaway message to that story is how much this is ingrained. We all saw that video, and we all heard her call the police, and we interpreted that call to the police as a threat. Yes. But if we actually believe that the police were public servants, we would not think to ourselves, that's a threat. We would say, oh, well, yeah, the police will get there. They'll sort it out. It'll be fine.
If the police were if we thought the police were public servants, she never would have made that call.
Louder.
Well, even if she did, I'm saying, let's say for a moment that she does make the call, that people get into an argument, the police come and we say, great, the police will sort it out. But what we all understood, the reason why Amy Cooper loses her job and loses her dog temporarily and all of that is because we all rightly understood her behavior to be threatening, because we understood that the police likely could show up and would not be an impartial, mediator between these two people, that they would show up and likely take an aggressive stance against the Black person in this interaction. Right. That is the fact that we were all outraged by her doing that, because otherwise she really didn't do anything wrong. The only thing she did wrong was because we understand the role that police play in our society. Right. If we believed anything different about them, we'd be arguing over why she did anything wrong, but we weren't. Including the people who are saying right now, I don't understand why we should defund the police. And so what I will say to you is, we should move money away from them because you rightly interpreted a call to them as a threat.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And so,
you're correct in that, and so follow that to its logical conclusion.
Right.
Because if I called my congressperson and that's all I did, and you were like, that person is a threat, that act was a threat, you'd have to wonder what was going on in that relationship. That calling someone, just asking them to come somewhere, is a threatening behavior. I just need that to sink in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you should say it every episode too, because it's important, right?
Yeah. It's like, we all get that. And so then I just need us to take the next step beyond that, because I didn't hear a whole lot of pushback of, well, she was just calling to get some help. We heard everybody, especially people who consider themselves to be moderate to liberal, to progressive to leftist. Everybody on that side was like, that was wrong. Even some of my conservative folks in my group were like, that was not okay, right? So we all have agreed to the same logic.
Right. Obviously, the system is like extremely corrupt and doesn't work how it's supposed to work.
Right. And she knows because her voice changed, her tone changed.
Mm-hmm.
She got real buck, and then she was like, oh my God.
Right.
I'm scared for my life.
As soon as she got on that phone, she was like Barbecue Becky, right? Like all of a sudden she started crying, like it was on the verge of tears. Because there was like that rage in her voice. I'm going to tell them that an African-American man is threatening my life. And then she gets on the phone with the dispatcher and all of a sudden it's like she's scared,
on the stress.
Right? And let's not forget, his name is Christian Cooper.
Who
like he's a birder? I don't know.
A birder.
Yeah, I don't watch birds.
A bird watcher?
Okay, so he's a birder.
They call them birders. Yeah.
Okay, dope.
Avid birder.
I'm with it.
He's an avid birder, and he's just like out there, like trying to do his life, like watch some fucking birds. And and he can't even watch the birds because he has to stop and pick up his phone to record because he knows in his mind. He knows based on everything that is happening over and over again that he could die in that moment.
Yeah, he can see what's coming.
Doesn't have his phone on. Like, what are we doing to Black people in this country? We're like, it's creating racism as a public health issue. Like, we need to recognize that.
I mean,
get rid of them.
There have been whole ass studies that have studied the amount of stress on Black populations, right? And how much stress, constant stress we live under, right? Lack of sleep, lack of worry. And it's not just, I'm worried that my team won't win the next game coming up whenever games start again. But, just this constant fear, this constant, having to check what you do, what you say, because just like 50, 75 years ago, if you say or even are assumed of doing the wrong thing, you could die and be lynched for it. Even today, right now, if you do the wrong thing, you could lose your life. You could be incarcerated. Right. Who knows what?
Right.
And as this book points out, there, in the same way that studies have shown that there are adverse effects of policing on Black communities, on Black folks' mental health, studies have shown that the reforms that have been presented, such as training, diversity hiring, procedural justice, like unpacking procedural justice and community policing, that those things do not actually work.
Yeah.
So we have no data that shows that, and we continue to say, here is many percents of Measure U for you, police. You may have this because we just hope you'll use it to.
Well, and then there's like performative shit, like, okay, we won't choke out your carotid artery anymore, and it's like, I mean, okay,
it's the bare minimum.
Yeah, I guess
me.
That's like,
and also I don't believe
of a start.
No,
Also, the other side of it too is that the cops do illegal shit all the time and never get in trouble for it. Yeah, so it's not, you can't even just be like, all right, we're going to tell the cops not to do this shit anymore, because they do whatever the fuck they want anyway, and there's no accountability.
They just lie about it. Got fired up.
You're absolutely right.
I wanted to regiment this episode out a little bit, everyone, and I know we all are like angry and we all hate cops, but I'm glad Shannon introduced that. All of these like internal changes that have been introduced, they don't work. And I think everyone on this show watching this happen, we're just like, no, those don't work. It's time to remove police from the community and provide real community-oriented spaces.
Correct.
Flo, you sound like you want to go right now.
Yeah, because I wanted to say not only have those things been disavowed, but I also think it's incredibly interesting that the very policies that are pushed on low-income communities, and in particular Black communities, are the very policies that they would balk at if they were under. So a good example is part of what activists are asking for right now is just a zero tolerance policy. Like, you're found on those white supremacist blogs, you're out. You're found to be, engaging in what we clearly understand as racist behavior, you're out. And they're like, no, that's not fair. But we were happy to apply zero tolerance policies to babies in kindergarten through 12th grade when it came to bringing weapons to school, even though a lot of times what ended up happening was somebody had a knife in their backpack because they had to walk home after school by themselves and they wanted to be able to protect themselves, right? But zero tolerance for the 7th grader who forgot his army knife in his backpack. But heaven forbid we actually hold the people who are sworn officers to a higher standard of not engaging in overtly racist practices, right? So there's something really insidious also about an organization that does so much to protect itself and is so unwilling to be under the very policies that it advocates other communities be under.
Yeah.
And Dave, it's actually really, oh my bad, I'm sorry. I think, a good point you bring up, because right now we're in this moment where we're starting to see cities and, maybe some counties considering, defunding, right, the police. Like, okay, I'll defund maybe like 5%, maybe a little bit percent here. But you're also seeing these new calls, and actually there's a hashtag that people should be cognizant of, 8 Can't Wait.
Yeah.
Right. And it comes out of Campaign Zero, who has done some pivotal work, right, since 2014 to talk about these very reforms that we're talking about right now. And they came out to sort of remind folks again of these reformist ideas. And they say that, if we do these ideas, like somewhere between 2/3 to 3/4 of like police violence can stop. And people were like, no. Like, number one, a lot of these policies like banning chokeholds, like requiring de-escalation, requiring more training, saying you got to intervene. A lot of these are already policies that are being adopted at the local levels, right? Whether in piecemeal or in full. And like, they're not working. Cops are still killing people, and even beyond killing, people are still being abused, right? Even if you don't die, you live, but you're being brutalized by the police. Minneapolis is actually like the poster child for a progressive police force. It's super diverse. They have all the reforms, all the body cameras. People are still dying.
Right.
Yep.
People are still dying.
And some of the worst cases of innocent folks dying that our country has seen. I wanted to finish the thread. I want to do this before we finish the show of what the libs are saying to us, right? Like they oh my God, that sounds crazy when you say it. So we've established these 99% of things that don't require cops, that we can have somebody else do it. So when we talk about defunding police, we're saying we can get rid of all those cops who spend all that time doing this nonsense shit.
Right. And hire like mental health first responders and people who are trained to actually deal with unhoused folks in like a way that helps.
Yeah. And not only that.
Or build housing, right?
Exactly.
Because
yes.
like people are only unhoused if they're unhoused. So once you house them, that problem goes away.
That's how you solve homelessness.
Right.
Put them in houses.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and then there's like a final thing here too, where cops do just like punitive things that make all of our days worse, like parking tickets and speeding tickets, and they're just paying for their own paychecks effectively through that. We don't need it. We don't need that.
We don't.
Here's where the libs come in and say, well, what do we do about all the murders and rapes?
I'm glad you brought this up. I had the same thing because people have asked me that. Like, what do you do? Like, murders and rapes are one thing, but really any situation in which there is somebody who has become violent and the people around that individual cannot contain the violence themselves and need outside help. What is the response to that in a system where the police have been abolished?
Well, let's start with, because I love because Kat Brooks has a really good answer to this, and she says we're not required to start with the hardest problem first.
No.
So let's be really clear here about, like, police are not doing a great job at solving murders or rapes. Let's start there.
Not only solving them, but I have terrible news for you about police and murdering and raping.
Right. Also,
I'm being handed a note.
But we have tons of rape kits that have not been run. Right. The conviction rate on rape cases is incredibly low. Like, there's just not a lot of good evidence to show us that these two incredibly egregious crimes, and I want to say, I'm not saying this without empathy for people who are victims of violent crime. I'm saying, though, that the police don't have a great track record of solving these crimes, of addressing these, and certainly not of preventing them, which I think anybody who has experienced sexual assault or has experienced violent crime does not, I mean, yes, it may make them feel better to feel like they received some sort of justice for their case, but they'd really much prefer it not to have happened in the first place. Right. They want their loved one back, and they want their own sense of safety back. And so if those are our goals, if our chief aims are that, they're not getting to that. So I think it's really important that we also start there, which is that if that's your goal, if that's the thing you're worried about, that they're not doing a great job of that right now. So that's not a thing you're going to lose because you never had it.
Yeah. Sure. You got to stanch out the determinants, and personally, I would turn to my public health professionals and maybe encourage one of them to run for mayor.
I'm saying Flow 2022, 2024. I'm with it.
My Twitter is blowing up with people saying that right now, actually.
Look,
so people ask me all the time when Flow's running. Yeah. Can I say,
I have a tattoo on my body.
Just like
Dr. Flow 2022 right across.
Yeah, all that.
We're all going as soon as we can. As soon as we're allowed, we're all going to get Dr. Flow campaign tattoos.
That's how Jane and Janelle move back, Flo.
Look,
we're trying to bring Jane back.
Come on, Flo. Flo, just be the mayor. God.
Flo gets so uncomfortable when we.
I love it.
She just can't even. Okay. So I want to bring up. Jane talked about 8 Can't Wait, and there's also 8 to Abolition, which I would encourage people to look into as we're talking about defunding the cops and abolishing the cops. These are two different campaigns that lay out 8 ways that we can work on those 2 different goals, defunding and abolition. And I got it, like, I know, like, I tend to be someone who thinks like far outside of the box, but as I'm I guess I'm not trying to be a centrist here. Here's what I'm trying to say.
Don't do that on the show. Don't come on the show and be a centrist.
I'm sorry.
Shannon, you sound like you love cops right now.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
The thing is, I've been meditating with Chief Hahn.
Yeah, I can see you've been texting Chief Hahn this whole episode.
He's my acro partner.
I was gonna say, just you stay away from Scott Jones, okay? He's my yoga buddy, not yours, okay? He's my yoga buddy.
Wait, who do I get?
The problem is that Kempa broke his toe and he's been needing a bud.
Okay.
So I was like, you know what? Okay. I'll do it. I'm just gonna do anyway.
All
okay.
Right. Keep him warm for me.
8 to Abolition. the 8 boxes that are laid out for people: defunding the police, demilitarizing communities, removing police from school, freeing people from prisons and jails, repealing laws that criminalize survival, invest in community self-governance, governance, provide safe housing for everyone, and invest in care, not cops. These, like, just go follow that hashtag. You know what I mean? That's
I mean, it's pretty fucking
give
self-explanatory.
Me a link to provide to in our description for that.
Yeah, I'll send that to you for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I mean, Dave, you asked, you said, I think at the beginning, you know, talking through what's defunding and what is abolition, right?
Mm-hmm.
And abolition is this, you know, worldview that many of our institutions that we have, particularly in the United States, right, come out of slavery, come out of Native American genocide. And these are not systems that we can hold and reform because they're very basis, right? It's just rooted in some really evil shit. And so if we actually want to create a better world, where in particular folks who are outside of the dominant narrative, people who are non-white, who are non-male, who are non-cisgender, right, who are non-heterosexual, who are non-able-bodied, can actually thrive, it's to actually like break these systems down completely and recreate new things. Everything doesn't have to stay or be replaced or repaired. Some of it is just terrible. But how we get there, we know that people can't always move quickly, can't always shift quickly, right? And so like this list of 8 things are ways in which, as we work in our communities, these are the things that we can focus on that will get us closer to abolition.
I think that's another thing that like is important to say, is that people who are scared by the idea of abolition have this idea that like we're just going to flip a switch tomorrow and no one will come when you call 911. You know, and that's not that is not at all what anybody's advocating for. It is like moving towards a system where we just legitimately don't need 911. We don't need cops.
Yeah.
You know, and it is possible.
In that we also want to say and remind people, the police are not here for you.
No.
So don't forget that while you're thinking about defunding the steps.
Well, they are here for the white males that I'm arguing with.
Well, yeah, like white supremacy, the interests of capital, those are the things that the cops are here to protect. And if those are things that are benefiting you, then the cops are basically your own security force.
I'm sorry.
For all of the rest of us, the cops are not. The job of the cops is not to protect us from crimes or violence.
Right.
We are perceived as the enemies of people who have capital, are in charge of all the capital. The cops work for them. We're on the other side of that wall.
Yeah,
and
Shannon, this is me. Oh, go ahead. I was
Dave.
just going to say, Shannon, that was just me like kind of arguing with myself on what to do with these fucking guys. Like, are they worth our time to argue with when they're just sitting there like, you need to change your messaging, defund the police is too confusing, or do we just move on and with this fight?
I have actually a really good rebuttal to that, because where I'm at the place now is that when people said Black Lives Matter, everybody said that is way too radical. You need something more inclusive, blah, 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 blah.
Racist.
Yes.
And now you have major corporations saying Black Lives Matter and wanting to take a knee, right? When at the time that was the most heretical thing you could possibly do.
Right.
And so there is a part of me that says you may there's the power of anchoring, right? It's like you start with defund and they start give it all, and then and then you start to hash it out. 2, I think it allows us to open up our minds and question our general assumptions of does the way we do things right now have to be the way we always do things?
Right.
And I think from an imaginative standpoint, that is incredibly compelling. But I would also say we need to stop giving into everybody doesn't understand it. Look, they will eventually come around. Now we have people who wouldn't say Black Lives Matter 7 years ago, screaming it and tattooing it and wanting to put it in their corporate memos. And so the same thing will happen with defund the police if we anchor there. Because our mayor today came out on Cap Radio and said he will not defund or disband the police. Like he anchored hard to the right. And so all I'm saying is we anchor hard to the left. Don't let up, because we need to really... It's all about reimagining what it means to be safe, whose interests we're protecting, and how we achieve that. That is what defunding the police is about. That is what police abolition is about. It is about reconsidering the very systems that we've come to rely on as much as the air that we breathe every day and that we take for granted, but that are not foregone conclusions. And so I actually think it's really important that we continue to talk about defunding the police and continue to talk about police abolition, because reinvest the money in something else is exactly what the typical liberal line is, and it's not compelling. It doesn't make anybody want to rally around it. It doesn't make you ask any additional questions, and it sounds as boring as it is because it is incredibly boring, and it sounds ineffectual because it is.
Because it is,
yeah.
I think there's definitely, I mean, like, honestly, this whole, like, I've never been a giant fan of Steinberg's, but watching him handle like the last week and a half of this thing, dude, I fucking hate this guy, man. He
so
fucking
charismatic.
sucks.
He's so charismatic.
Yeah.
He sucks so bad. How could you possibly be fucking this up as bad as he's fucking it up? I mean, I think for me, it's obvious that he can't stand up to the cops. He has nothing. He has nothing to say to the cops. The cops run him. It's not the other fucking way around. And it's fucking embarrassing, dude. Darrell, fuck you, dude. Like, I cannot wait to get your fucking ass out of that office, man.
Say it.
So big
Flow 2022.
That's all you, Jane. Go.
Oh yeah, number one, Flow 2022. Or 24, whichever one, city council or mayor. I'm here for either one.
This is why I wanted Jane on tonight.
Keep saying this. Number 2.
And I participated in my own trolling, so I deserve it. I fought hard for Jane to be on tonight, and now I'm sitting here going, this is what you get, Flo. So
these are natural consequences.
Flo threatened me like an hour before the show, saying,
I did. I definitely did.
Also, abolition, this is not a term which is used, but it's very much like an Afrofuturist politic, right? And we have not defined that. It's still formulating as to what this is, but it's an Afrofuturist politic in that we are trying to envision a world in which Black people actually are seen as being humans like everybody else, right? That we can exist like everybody else. That can happen if we don't actually abolish these like prior systems. And so like Flo said, when we push towards an abolitionist future, we're trying to create that new future, right? And so to Dave, to your point, I would say, forget them guys, right? They will be drug along by like the history of time, whether they win or lose, right? But as we keep normalizing these things like defund the police, demilitarize the police, they get brought forward. And so I guess my third point is that it's actually very, very, very frustrating because you get folks who are liberals, who are these moderates, who are these centrists, who are like, we have to be pragmatic. We have to, be incrementalist. How demilitarize the police? How much more incremental can we be? Saying, hey, take away the tank.
Right.
Take away the stun,
right.
the stun grenade. Like, these are not radical things. Hey, we see cops.
Darrell, you looted $10 million a year from Measure U to give it
Take it back.
Give it back.
Sell the fucking bear claw.
This is the most aid to abolition is probably the most pragmatic but straightforward way we can be to say it does not work. Take away these things, and that things. And slowly but surely, we can actually get to a world where Black folks don't die. But folks are always like, well, these are non-starters. They're non-starters.
Right.
We're giving you the most basic and straightforward. Who wants a militarized police force in their city?
Right.
Right.
Can we also speak to the condescension of those folks when it's like, this is an Afrofuturist concept that's been around and explored deeply for what, 60 years?
Longer.
Yeah.
Longer.
And so them just being like this knee-jerk, all these people going a little too crazy on this. It's like they have no cultural context, or they like really don't respect the history of this.
Right. At all.
Yeah. Well, Dave, speaking of not respecting history, I have some history from just the last few months. Do you see that? That is a fucking flawless segue right there.
You can't even get through it without recognizing the segue.
So speaking of my own personal employment history, I hate to bring the tone of the show down. I haven't been working since March, you know, and I'm all right. I'm gonna be fine. I'm kind of one of the lucky ones, but you know, I have all this free time, and a lot of what I've been doing with the free time is listening to all this great voices content. And here's the problem is that now we're in June, and I think I might have gone through all of it, but I don't know because I'm not aware of any like centralized place where all of this information is like, you know, conglomerated. Is there like such a website that I could go to where there's just like a ton of this content that I can access at any time, whenever I want?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I just want to take a moment to validate and respect your history with employment. But Shannon's face.
We just can't do it. We can't do it. That's
but we do have a website. It's called voicesrivercity.com. In our 3 years, we've lived a few different iterations and have done some very fun, weird stuff, including the Sack Follows the Money project, as well as some very funny, weird arts coverage and some really great community essays. And I gotta tell you, you know, politics season is amping up. Like, not only are we going to remain hard on Black Lives Matter and Black liberation, but holy shit, do I have so many community members reaching out to me with dirt, and there is so much for us to cover.
Let's fucking go.
We've got some good episodes coming up.
Dirt.
So voicesrivercity.com's the centerpiece. You know, you can find our work kind of all over in every single podcast app. We are on YouTube, and that is getting increasingly popular. We did a live stream of some really great panels over the weekend. Flo, you were a major part of that. Can you tell folks what that was about?
Sure, absolutely. We actually called it Voices from the Frontline, and we did a 4-part panel discussion so that we could engage in safe physical distancing, and we talked a little bit about the history and sort of the political landscape around policing in the U.S. and in institutional racism, and then we talked to people who were frontline at the recent protests about why and what it means to show up and what it means to be, you know, not just a white ally, but also a white abolitionist. And then we also talked about how this was impacting our psychological health, how this was impacting, you know, folks at various intersections in terms of identities. And then we closed out with sort of future visioning. We also certainly touched on what it means to defund the police and what it means to be an abolitionist and many of the topics that we talked about on tonight's show. So it was a really fantastic panel, and I just want to thank once again all the people who showed up on a Friday afternoon to make all of that happen. And it's available on our YouTube channel and is in the process of editing. So if you watched it live, you'll see an even cleaner version of it once the editing is complete this week.
Yeah,
I saw
and
it
we'll
live.
be publishing that on our YouTube as well, right?
Yes.
Yep.
So that's
And
really
shout
exciting.
out Mackenzie, Sectarian
Yes.
Union.
Yeah.
Shout
Yes,
out,
absolutely.
Keon. Shout out
Keon, Sonia,
shout out
Addie,
everybody. All of them.
Asantua,
I was like, where are my
Kula,
people?
Ryan,
Ryan, yes.
Khalil,
definitely.
and then my panel of Christies. We had Dr. Christy Hagan from Safe Black Space, and also Christy Ketchum from
awesome.
Our Rightful Place in the Sister Circle. So, it was a really, and I'm just so thankful for everybody being able to come together so quickly to make that happen, and just to be able to share their expertise and their perspectives.
Yeah. And shout out to my one mildly conservative friend in the world, Scott Syfax, who was the moderator. You know, Scott was the guy who started NELP. And he's the reason that, you know, Flo and I are, you know, just thick as thieves. Yeah. And
we have to be enemies. If we're like friends with Scott Jones and the mayor and Chief Hahn, then you and I, by comparison, have to be like mortal enemies at this point.
Oh man. Life's getting confusing.
It's getting confusing.
I can't wait for Flo to like be the mayor so that I can come on the show and be like, "What the fuck is Flo doing?"
Yeah,
this is fucking
Skylar's
bullshit.
Just gonna be furious.
That will fucking rule.
I noticed how she's not receiving that, but it's okay. It's okay.
We just got to shout you just like give it some time. She'll be able to receive it well in time.
Yeah. And final shout out to our buddy KJ, no relation to Kevin Johnson. KJ runs KJ2 Productions, and he did all the technical stuff on this.
Yes.
Oh, dope.
Yeah.
It was awesome.
So yeah, that was all really cool. Just to finish our roundup, we're on all the major social media. We are on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. As I said, we've just got some really cool stuff coming. And, in the spirit of amplifying voices, I just think that there's so much happening. And we all know it, right? We all feel it. We're living through history. That this week has been a year, right? And so let's just keep doing what we're doing, and just like, I just think that some of these fights can really result in some changes, and I've been blown away by the demonstrators in Sacramento in the last week and a half. I am on Twitter at Kempa.
I'm Guillotine for you. That's Guillotine, the number 4, YOU.
I am Shan N.D. Stevens.
And I am at Flojaune, FLOJAUNE.
Now, Dr. Mantey, how can we find you online?
Y'all can't find me. I'm behind the scenes. But
it's okay if you don't want to share anything.
Jane is so worth following. She's worth following. Yeah. Like, you will get, if you're short on time and can't read books, go and just follow Jane, and she will keep you up to date on all the things you need to think about. It'll be irreverent. It'll be informative. It'll be snarky. It'll be hilarious. It will be in depth. It's everything you need at the moment you need it. So,
and don't come in my comments. Don't come in my comments if you're not ready for an education. I'll just say that.
Okay.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah.
Not just for me, but for my followers too. Bless them. But you can find me on Facebook at Jayama. That's JAYAMA. But I will block you.
Phenomenal on there.
I will block you.
She is.
If you bother me, I will block you. And do not add me as a friend. Just follow.
Just follow her. Yeah.
And then also you can follow me on Twitter at @the_black_Jane, because there's only how many Black Janes in the world.
Awesome.
Can I say, for our listeners, if you have not already, I encourage you to go to voicesrivercity.com and look up, it's called Solidarity in Science, which is the speech that Jane gave at the March for Science held at the Capitol. And she talks about the links between science and politics, and urges people to act. And it's a beautiful speech. It's worth your time. And it is, Skylar, maybe you want to check it out.
I forgot you two were basically the start of Voices River City.
We were. I wasn't going to bring it up.
Publish that, yeah.
It was me and Lázaro talking about the tennis union and the work that we're doing here and the ties that are between housing also and police. So, it's all interlinked.
Yeah.
Going full circle. Did we talk about how for just the price of a beer that you aren't drinking in the bar right now,
no, we didn't,
you could support this show on Patreon? We're on Patreon, /Voices River City. Anything, if you listen to the show and you like what we're doing and you want to contribute, anything helps. So $5, $10, $4,000, it's completely up to you.
Totally up to you.
Give what you can. But for real though, if you're listening to this podcast here, it's really, really important to support your grassroots journalists, right, who are doing this kind of work. So please just give something. Give $1. Give anything. Doesn't matter. Give something. Same for those who are doing the work right now on the ground, who are organizers, whether it be the Anti-Police Terror Project, whether it be Decarcerate Sacramento, whether it be, is it Black Justice Sacramento, Flo? Black Justice Sacramento. Whether it be Sacramento Tennis Union, like give to the grassroots work. If you love it, if you can't do it, at least give some cash.
I like to add NorCal Resist to
NorCal Resist for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah,
they're phenomenal.
I think we'd be remiss too if we didn't include one more independent media org that has been fucking unflinching.
Yes, they're amazing.
Black Zebra Productions.
Yes.
Black Zebra Productions.
Black Zebra.
Yes.
Dude, we stand for Black Zebra.
Incredible.
For sure.
Yes.
Really.
And they were out there in times when like I was thinking, I want to do some live feeds, and like I kind of thought that I would like suffer physical harm, and I didn't have a media buddy.
They went
out. Yep.
They went.
So support them. Holy Christ.
Please.
The best I could do was just join in on the ACLU lawsuit against Darrell. But yeah, no, they are fucking amazing.
Yeah.
And just as it was about to be filed, they were like, all right, we'll let the curfew and the National Guard go.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. I can go back to that fucking piglet statue at Doko now. Right.
You can. You promised us, Skylar. You promised us.
Yeah.
Well, look, I probably won't. So when you drive by it tomorrow and it's all ACAB'd up,
definitely wasn't
me. I didn't.
Yeah, no, Skylar's not gonna.
I don't know who did that shit.
Oh, by the way, when are you sending me that picture of Attorney General Barr?
I'm still working on it. I'm working on it.
Flag. Okay.
That was like one of my favorite parts of the last episode, or I was like, wait, what? Skylar has what?
No, the wheels are in motion. We're working on it.
All right.
I love it. I love to think about it.
All right. Well, until next time.
Yes, I guess we're done with the show. Why are we still talking?
Thank you so much, Jane, for being on with us today.
It was a huge pleasure.
Wonderful.
I'm going to bed.
And a privilege.
You know how we all feel about you, and yeah, we're keeping you up late. But
baby, come back.
No.
Wait till you move back. To Sacramento, we all know what's happening.
I'm there in spirit. I'm there via the chats and whatnot, and Black
That's
Zebra.
True. Yeah.
So
right.
Well, guys,
thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks for listening. Be safe.
Stay sane.
Stay healthy.
And stay away from me.
Yeah.
There you go.
That's the sign off.
All right. We got it.
We'll nail this one of these days.
Someday. Good night, everybody.
All right. Good night.
Just bye.